Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on the new Audio-Visual Expenditure Credit and the AVEC, as it's now been known, and AVEC for independent film. So my name's Mansi. I'm Director of Certification and Video Games at the British Film Institute. Just for the sake of anyone who's visually impaired, and for accessibility, because all these sessions are going to be podcasts and on screen, I'm just going to give a little bit of description of what I'm wearing and who I am. So I am a white middle-aged woman. I'm not giving away my age. I have fair hair, blonde, mousy brown, green eyes, and I'm wearing a multicoloured long dress. So I'd like to introduce all my panellists. Harriet.
Hi, so I'm Harriet Finney. I'm Deputy Chief Executive at the BFI. I am a white, middle-aged woman with short, dark hair and dressed in navy blue today. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Bennett McGhee. I am a producer and co-founder of Home Team with my business partner, Dominic Buchanan. I am a Scottish, Zambian, fairly tall guy. I'll leave the rest to your imagination, what that looks like in your heads. And wearing blue jeans, black top, so highly original.
Hello, I'm Judith Chan. I am of Dutch, Portuguese, Chinese origin. I'd like to think young middle-aged woman with dark hair and in a blue dress. So I'm an executive director at Coutts, and we are financiers and bankers to all the creative industries.
I'm Isla MacGillivray. I'm a partner at Saffery. We're an accountancy and tax firm specialising in the creative industry tax reliefs. I am a female, blonde hair, and today wearing a purple dress.
Great, thanks everyone. Thank you. That's nice. So we're just going to unpack. So this time last year, Isla and I were doing a session on what we expected the audiovisual expenditure credit to look like. So in November 2022, the government announced, or Treasury announced, that they'd like to look at the tax reliefs that we have. So we have 5 screen sector tax reliefs for film, high-end television, animation television, children's television, and video games. And we've had the tax relief system since 2007 when film first came in. And they were looking to modify how the tax relief's given out. And it wasn't a bad thing. It's more about how the mechanism is given out. They promised that there wouldn't be any reduction in any of the how much would be received. We had the consultation. There was a lot of different consultations, and we, the BFI, brought people together and brought Treasury to come and speak to people so they could understand. And Harriet's going to unpack a bit on that in a moment. So as of the 1st of January this year, AVEC is now in place, and we'll do provide some detail of what that looks like, what the criteria is. As you know, we still have the cultural test requirements, but then we had some very welcome news on the 6th of January this year with the announcement that there will now be AVEC for independent films. It's being abbreviated as IFTC, but it is still AVEC. It's just a higher rate with some extra conditions. So on that note, I think it would be good to unpack and sort of get to the history of where the independent film tax credit has come from and how we got there, because I think there is a lot of information. So can I turn to you, Harriet?
Yes, thanks very much, Anna. So yes, I have to say, kind of dialing back 12 months, I don't think we would have imagined that we'd be sitting here today talking about the fact that there is, live, already accessible, and independent film tax relief. So a lot of people in the industry have been involved in this. Government have been involved across all the departments. It's been a huge team effort, really, is the thing I want to sort of say first and foremost. So I just think, just in terms of a little bit more about the story behind it, because it has obviously happened very, very quickly, and we thought it might just be helpful to give a little bit of the context as to why the change came about. So at the BFI, we wear 3 hats at the BFI. We're a cultural charity, but the bit of the BFI that I look after is our lead body, relationship with government and industry, and also we're a lottery distributor. And I always think about the fact that we have 2 levers that we can play in terms of bringing about change in the sector. One of them is thinking about actually how we develop really fantastic policy interventions. The second is how we can use lottery funding. And obviously for independent film, we support it with lottery funding, but actually it's very, very evident and has been really since about 2017, the independent film sector needed significantly more support that could be given by the existing system. So that was a sort of independent public funders, and also how the sort of financing was happening. So it's been a problem we've been acutely aware of, as I say, and working on since 2017 at the BFI. There was an independent film review back then, but actually over the course of the subsequent years, we've seen even more pressures actually on this really important piece of the sector. So you've seen obviously huge changes away in terms of financing, packages are put together, sales are happening, where IP is sitting, and a contraction in the amount of public funding available as well. As we came out of the pandemic, it felt that this was an absolutely critical piece to look at for the sector, and we promised to do a really in-depth piece of work, which was the Economic Review of Independent Film, which was published back in 2022. And that was a piece of work done by Alma Economics, and it looked at every single piece of the value chain across independent films. So we looked at production, we looked at distribution, we also looked at exhibition, and it came up with some recommendations in terms of areas that really warranted some further work. Now, one of them around production was looking at actually what would be the impact of introducing a higher rate of tax relief for independent film. And PACT took up that challenge to undertake that piece of work. And again, working with Alma, did a very, very detailed sort of Green Book Treasury standard analysis of what it was that needed to happen to actually make a real shift change in the amount of independent production that was able to take place in this country. So they looked at different rates, they looked at different budgets, and actually came up with a sort of sweet spot in terms of being able to really deliver for Treasury as well as for the sector, which was a budget range between £1 million and £15 million at a rate of 40%. So that work was completed last summer. And then three things happened, and I think this is the bit where you see what was, kind of policy development, very, very evidence-driven policy development, turn into reality very, very quickly. And this is the sort of piece that I thought I'd just fill you in on now. So three things happened. The strikes, and I think that was something that happened which meant you suddenly could see, whether it's as a policymaker or even actually as a major inward investment company working in the UK, the strikes meant that we ended up with, I think it was over 70% of our workforce suddenly was not working overnight during last summer and the early autumn. And you suddenly kind of had a real sort of reality check in terms of just how much little production was going on in our domestic independent part of the ecosystem. And I think it really was really important that actually those who are those major inward investors actually realised they really desperately need this part of the sector, because that is quite a lot of where the talent comes from, where the crew is learning, but also actually it's where the most brilliant stories are told, and we're able to actually kind of nurture those, whether it's writers, whether it's directors and talent through the system as well. So we suddenly had the major inward investors on our side, which I think was a powerful in terms of the lobbying story that we could tell. Secondly, the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee launched an inquiry into British film and high-end television. They were absolutely inundated with evidence as part of that review. They actually ended up keeping it open for an extra month because I think there was just so much information coming through. So again, you've suddenly got a sort of, people actually having to write down what the challenges are in the sector. And that evidence was all published in November as well. And again, you've got not only those of us working in the independent sector or on behalf of the sector, but also those working in the really big studios writing actually the biggest crisis point for the sector is in independent film. And then the third thing that happens, which sounds sort of slightly frivolous, but there was a party at Number 10 in December. And I mean, the Prime Minister and this government have been huge supporters of the creative industries. And the BFI was asked to pull together an event. And we had to think really hard about actually, we know where all the problems are, and we know that this is going to be a showcase and celebration of the film sector. But actually, how do we use this to tell a really, really clear story about actually the piece of the puzzle which is in peril? So we told the story, we had a number of exhibits, and we were hugely helped by people across the industry pulling it together. But we had things like the Barbie costumes, and actually the story we could tell there was the fact that Jacqueline Durant, who designed those, very much started her life in independent film. We had the Chicken Run models, which are obviously the Netflix film, but actually obviously Aardman is a British company, British IP, thinking actually how we told that story about how critical it is you invest in that grassroots, and from that grows these fantastic global kind of names and productions. We also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about the economic impact of investing in our talent and British kind of creativity, but actually how important it is culturally for storytelling. And last year we were fortunate enough to have sort of through the BIFAs 5 absolutely brilliant independent British female diverse directors, so we were able to showcase their work as well. And then we sort of topped it off. Gurinder Chadha spoke absolutely brilliantly about her story in terms of coming from starting in Bend It Like Beckham, what that meant. She's distributed everywhere in the world. I mean, she literally, I think she's the only person who's been North Korea, actually has, shown her films. So actually something which started small became a global success, telling diverse stories and launching the career of Keira Knightley. So she really kind of nailed the messaging in that room. And it was a penny drop moment. And the Prime Minister himself actually said, left and said, I want to do something for this sector. And that was the beginning of what was a very frantic 3 months in terms of us working very, very closely with DCMS, our colleagues there, with Treasury, and also with Number 10 to bring about the announcement that took place on the 6th of March. So that's the story behind it.
Thanks, Harriet.
The rights are available to that story.
I think you could actually make a film of it from the beginning. So Isla, the AVEC, as I've said and mentioned earlier, is now in place. I really need to take my glasses off to read this. Sorry, is in place from 1st of January 2024. Although you can still claim film tax relief if you wish to. I think most people will be going under AVEC. And although AVEC for independent film can't be claimed until 1st of April next year, it will be backdated to films that started PP on or after 1st of April this year. So as we're now dealing with 2 different rates, can you run us through the value? Because I think that's what everyone wants to know. We have a headline rate which says 53%, but actually you need to know how that bottoms out and how much the actual value of it actually is.
Absolutely. I'm going to hopefully just pull up some slides just to show you some figures. So previously, under the tax reliefs, for film and our other creative industry tax reliefs, the rate was 25%. So that's what you would be used to associating with the UK tax credit. We now have different figures for different reliefs, so it's just easier to hopefully have it up there so everyone can see. So the Audio-Visual Expenditure Credit covers all of these types of productions. So for film and high-end TV, you have a headline rate of 34%, but the maximum cash rebate that you can get back, so in the same way that you would have got your tax credit before, works out at 25.5%. So that's your effective rate. So when someone says, 34% up from 25, that's not your like for like. We're comparing 25% tax credit to a 25.5% film and high-end TV AVEC. For animation, and that's film and TV, so I did just want to mention it, but also kids TV, it's an increased rate of 39%, and it works out at 29.25% effective rate. And then when we get onto the independent film, we're up to 53% headline rate, which works out at 39.75% effective rate. So that's that 40% figure that people round up. But just so you can see all the different rates and just so you're aware of them. I think it's just really important, we've not really touched on it yet, but what makes you an independent film, so a UK independent film? So how would you qualify for this increased rate? So first of all, it's production budgets up to 15 million. So anything above that, you would have to be into the AVEC film. So up to 15 million, but there's also additional criteria you need to meet to qualify as a UK independent film. So you need to have either a UK director, UK screenwriter, or you need to be an official co-production under a co-production treaty. So it's one of those three. But hopefully that you can see it is actually much wider than people might associate with just UK independent film as a headline.
I'm just going to touch on a couple of areas here, because obviously I think most people know we do the qualifying as British, which you have to do for all the tax relief. One thing I mentioned, the 39% for animation, film and TV, that was announced, that was last year, so that was part of the original AVEC consultation. However, animation film that is under the 15 million threshold will be able to go for the higher rate. So that's one area. And then obviously the other criteria that you need to qualify for AVEC or AVEC for independent film, you still need to qualify as British, either under the relevant the film cultural test or as an official co-pro as well.
I think sometimes it's just easy to see with some figures. So I will just use it using the independent film tax expenditure credit rate, just because I think that's most relevant to people in this room. But here we have it as if you had it under AVEC. So you had your 34% headline rate and 25.5% effective rate. And the reason we get from one to the other is that the change is this AVEC amount is taxed at the main rate of corporation tax here in the UK. And the main rate of corporation tax at the moment is 25%. So you have to deduct that off your AVEC amount to get the maximum amount of cash rebate you can get from the UK government, which is how you get down to 25.5. Or if you do qualify as an independent film, your 53% would get you to your first figure. And then again, you have to tax that at 25% to get you down to an effective rate of 39.75%. The other thing, just in case those who are not familiar with the tax credit regime, is that has existed previously and still exists at the moment. We have an 80% cap on qualifying spend. So if we just look at the purple on the right, in this example, we have 10 million budget, and we're saying 50% is UK qualifying spend. So we've got 5 million of qualifying spend. You would take your 53%, to get your sort of AVEC amount, tax that, and then you would end up with the maximum cash rebate you can get, which is the 1.987 figure there. If you did go all the way up to the maximum, so you had a 15 million budget movie and you were doing all of that work in the UK or above 80%, you would cap out. So the maximum qualifying expenditure you can have would be 80% of 15 million. So that would be your 12 million. You would then apply your 53%, tax that, and then you'd get the maximum 4.77 million. So that's the maximum cash value of the UK independent film tax credit as it currently stands.
Thanks, Isla. And again, the other criteria that you do need to continue to meet is the film has to be intended for theatrical release if you're going for the independent film tax credit. And there was one other thing I've forgotten, but I'll come back to that. So I want to ask you, Judith, as Coutts obviously have been financing tax reliefs for a number of years across the sectors, and now we'll go forward in terms of expenditure credit. How does that work? What do you offer to producers?
We're a bank. We're very uncomplicated, I like to think. So we currently fund against the UK tax credit, but we'll fund against the AVEC, and hopefully in time, when royal assent is granted and it's embedded in law, we will then start funding the AVEC for the independent films. So it's really quite simple. We'd always require opinion from an accountant. So if Isla's able to give me an opinion that says your tax credit is valued at X, we tend to lend up to about 95% of the value of that tax credit. And we can cash flow alongside other financiers through other productions, so it doesn't have to be last in. So we could be alongside other cash flow financiers. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And that's one thing I was going to touch on in terms of timelines. We have to wait for royal assent, and there, as you will have, we can only give out the information that is on Treasury website at the moment. There will be an appointed day when you are able to get a certificate from us that you can then use if you need to loan against the tax credit going forward. In terms of how that works, some of you may have already applied for, if you've started principal photography after the 1st of April this year, you may have already applied and you may already have your standard cultural test certificate. We are looking at processes, so you wouldn't necessarily have to apply again to meet the additional criteria, because the additional criteria aren't actually part of the culture test, but they will be built into our application. It's just separate legislation. So yeah, we're going to do as much as we can to tell you when it will be, and we will sort of do the admin process. There's not a heavy lifting. I will add as well, you can still claim the standard AVEC until 1st of April next year.
Yeah, and I
as
think
well.
that's very helpful in terms
Yeah.
of the process of getting the new certificate, because then we would also require the new certificate to ensure that you do qualify for the independent film
Yeah.
AVEC.
So, Bennett, you're the actual practitioner.
So, I'm going to try. I think I've retained 80% of it, or 40% of 80%. Sorry, bad joke. No, but I am going to try and connect some of this and make it. So we are going to have a Rachel Riley countdown moment. That's one for the countdown fans, maybe not. There is. I do the calculation in a different way, a slightly different way, which is 40% of 80% is 32%, and then I just apply that to the budget. So that obviously applies to just the independent film tax credit. It was a wonderful, incredible achievement getting this additional boost to UK independent films, because, as we've touched upon, COVID, strikes, was it a recession, was it not a recession, but we still felt the cost. Independent films, were decimated. Like, we know what happened in cinemas, like bankruptcy, closures, attendances. On the back of that, what happened was financiers, studios wanted sure things. That's not necessarily what independent film is. Independent film, for me particularly, is, I want to respect commerciality. I do want to make a lot of money for it, but I'm also driven by filmmakers with a vision, auteurs. There was a thriving environment for that pre-COVID. It became incredibly challenging to pursue a vision without trying to sneak it into a genre movie and therefore give it some, a better upside for financiers to invest. So with this, it's genre agnostic. If you're an independent filmmaker, I think what I did, and I suspect many other producers, not just in the UK but around the world, did, was look at their finance plans and go, what does this do? And it made such a huge impact to independent film. Specifically on a project that I'm working on, we have Film 4 behind us. Hopefully we have BFI later down the road. And then I applied the tax credit, the new tax credit, this 32%, and all of a sudden we were halfway there, more than halfway there. I know films that applied the new tax credit, they're going to slightly delay their shoot, but they applied that tax credit and it closed the gap in their finance. I know of other films that have increased their budgets because of it. So it really is just an incredible thing for independent film, and it's it's saved a lot of us. It's given us a lot of huge hope. I think that was connecting all the dots. I think
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm sort of going to open up.
Can I
to
add
no,
one
of course.
small thing? Sorry. On an international side, and this only occurred to me because I'm slow like that yesterday, when I met some international producers who were looking to co-produce in the UK. Some of them were just considering it prior to the announcement, and as soon as the announcement happened, they went, so it's the same as the inward investment and the studios coming here and those bigger films coming here. All of a sudden, it's not just we that benefit in the UK.
Yeah.
It's internationally, globally, everyone's gone, oh wow, how can I, if I'm not already looking at the UK, I should be looking at it and making my film there.
I was just about to say that having that additional factor of being an official co-production, I think, I'm now 19 years into certification, and when I started, for those of you who are old enough in the room, I started with the old sale and leaseback scheme, where predominantly most applications were official co-production, and then the introduction of film tax relief, it sort of is a role reverse, and we've seen co-production diminish, and in the last couple of years, and I'd say particularly since we've had our global stream fund, which has a co-production strand, we're beginning to see official co-pro go up again, which is brilliant, and I think this will already boost official co-pro for the future as well. I wanted to ask everyone and open up, and there will be time for questions at the end. Are there any potential concerns we need to think about in terms of, this is an incentive where you're getting quite a lot that other lenders or other financiers may think, well, you're getting more, so I don't want to put in more. And, that would be just sort of a real sort of concern, because no, we really need it. It's not to take for others to now go down.
I mean, I can just come in on sort of thinking about the public funding element of it. I mean, I think there had been some concerns about the fact that with this in place, public funders might think about diverting their funding to other areas that might need it. I mean, I can certainly say, from the BFI and the National Lottery funding that we give out, that's absolutely not the case. I mean, we very much view that there is a mixed ecology in terms of how you piece together, funding for independent film, and public funding for many is absolutely vital, and it's not something that we would look at substituting or moving around elsewhere at all.
Yeah, I'd say, I think as well as BFI, I read the press release that EV Yates was saying, and I think, BBC's position the same. I'm sure Film 4's is absolutely the same. We're very lucky in the UK to have, those three cornerstones of independent, financing, and, they're working with us and, not going to, invest less because we're getting more from the Treasury. One of the things I also did was, what does that new 32% benefit to my finance plan? Because obviously, well, not obviously, I don't have that money.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give it to myself for free. So you have to go to a lender, and you have to say, if you're using the tax credit, to advance the money into your finance plan, you have to go to a lender. And there was a slightly cynical part of myself that thought, oh, do the lenders look to, gain their position on it? I have to say, and all the calls are made, and Judith and I spoke as well, all the lenders are, they're like, we'll keep to our normal rates. So then the next part of it is actually, how does this thing get implemented? And I think we have to wait for the royal assent and some certificates and all of these things. And so I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone else knows this, I don't know yet if people are doing it. I'm sure there are some brilliant minds who have found a way to structure it, use AVEC, and then flip over to to the independent film tax credit. But I think at the moment we're waiting.
Yeah.
For
I haven't heard of anyone that is prepared to lend against it until legislation is in, and I know, Judith, you be comfortable doing that. And I think that makes sense if we haven't actually got legislation. Government are committed to it. We're having conversations every week to make sure we get this all right for the legislation.
Yeah, as a bank, we probably wouldn't be able to do that, but we will wait for royal assent. But there are one or two other non-bank financiers out there that will actually cash flow that for you, and that's brilliant, and that's great. They've got the small window to help you until banks like us will come on board. So you can get funding, but just don't be surprised that the cost of that would be far more significant than if you were to wait. But I understand that and appreciate that. Some producers need to get their funding in place. You need to keep your your completion bonds all happy with the strike price. I mean, my concern, which is more concern, I guess, for the producer in a way, is is from a timing perspective. So if you're shooting a production now, which will qualify because you want to put in your claim on the 1st of April at 9 a.m. or 10, whenever you start work, you're going to be deluged.
I don't give out the money, just remind everyone.
So you're probably going to be deluged, right?
Yeah.
So from a process point of view, how long is that going to then take to get the claim actually paid? Because that's going to affect your interest reserve if you're borrowing it from bank, let's say.
That's why we're planning ahead now.
Yeah, so I think it's really important. So we just need to be, I guess, a little bit more conservative. And I'm sure all the producers want to be able to claim it as quick as possible. And I'm sure it will be as efficient, but, obviously I'm sure producers need to know that process will be in place.
Yeah. And that's why it is important to understand you can still claim for the standard AVEC until next year. So although it's not going to be as much, you can then claim the difference from 1st of April 2025. So it's not that you can't claim anything. I don't think anyone would put you in that position. Have you found you work with a lot of different banks and financiers, have you heard anyone, Isla?
So we've not, but we would sit in a similar sort of category as Judith, in that we would prepare an opinion letter for a bank that would look at all the various criteria. We would need your BFI certificate, and we would estimate the value of your AVEC, whether it's your 34% or your 53%. But we can't do that, and we can't opine on that and sign off if there's not legislation. And it's probably worth mentioning, why are we talking so much about something that isn't legislated yet? But I think it's actually a really positive thing in that the alternative would be they just made no announcement, and then they came out with it next year and they said from 1st of April 25, and here's all your legislation, it's all great. Whereas actually what they're trying to do from the UK government side is give the benefit as quickly as they possibly can. So they said, look, we know we've not put it into legislation yet, but this is what we're going to do. And yes, it's still not even legislated yet, but from qualifying productions from 1st of April 24, we'll let you make all of that qualifying spend. but you need to give us time, and that's why they're saying you can't submit till 1st of April 25. But at least they're giving the opportunity for films this year to still qualify.
Yeah. And I think in general, reception from industry clients on yours and Judith's side, from domestic and international, has been extremely positive. I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
I mean, from my point of view, it's been quite interesting coming out to Cannes and done a series of sort of 2-3 days of meetings, and it's really the only thing anybody, from whether I'm talking to somebody in Ireland or Germany, US, I mean, across the board, it's the first thing people want to talk about, either because they want to understand how they could do exactly the same thing, or because they actually view that it is a massive opportunity in terms, particularly, say, around that co-production stipulation in it, in terms of actually it is definitely opening up opportunities for others as well. So from my point of view, it feels like it's been a really, really landed very, very well. And then also just on the ground back at home is actually, again, we see a lot of productions coming through the BFI and through the Filmmaking Fund, and just anecdotally how many people have been able to either resurrect projects they didn't think they'd be able to close the financing on, or been able to actually kind of quite quickly move to closing something which they obviously thought was going to take a bit longer. So I do think in terms of kind of a boost of momentum in the sector, it's going to be really significant.
Yeah, and I'd also say there isn't a definition of independent film. So in terms of inward investment, as long as you're meeting those criteria, so I've had quite a few calls, and we're getting a lot of inquiries for lower budget inward investment films. So it doesn't have to be a definition of what independent film is. It is really important for the independent film sector. Obviously, Harriet explained that, and that this has been something we've been working on for a number of years. But do we have the skills, infrastructure, and the crew to manage going forward? I think that's important because, we obviously have done the skills review, and we need to make sure we can support the production going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that in terms of, obviously, at the BFI, as well as looking at sort of independent filmmaking. Another area where we've done a lot of work, working again with partners across the sector, particularly Screen Skills, is thinking about actually the kind of skills landscape more generally and what needs to happen there, because we know that there were obviously, a couple of years ago, significant challenges in terms of forecast of, the amount of workforce that we needed to serve the sector. I mean, it looks like the sector is sort of slightly re-baselining. I mean, if you look at the sector as a whole in terms of kind of film, high-end TV, kind of production more generally. So I'd say probably the skills pressure is not as critical as it was and forecast to be a couple of years ago, but it doesn't mean that we're not thinking really, really hard about actually how we build long-term infrastructure which can support all pieces of the production sector. So an intervention that we're making at the BFI through lottery funding is skills clusters. And that's about actually how do we make sure that areas which are seeing and building capacity for production outside London are able to actually build a indigenous skills base as well. So we have one in each of the nations, a skills cluster, and then we've got the north of England, West Midlands, and we also do have one in London as well. So that's very much about building proper kind of infrastructure hubs across the UK to support skills development there.
And Bennett, are you finding with the new projects that you're structuring that you have the skills support is there and the structures?
We haven't. We're also waiting a little bit so we can get the full benefit of this tax credit. So we haven't come into that whole crewing up situation yet. But I've seen it. I was on something during COVID, and it was very difficult. It was very competitive. Let's call it competitive.
Okay.
I think at the low end, I think that the lower budget end of the independent film tax credit, I think it will be, predominantly new filmmakers coming through. They might have crews with them. I think, be okay. I think there's more room to kind of take risks on stepping people up. I think it's at the higher end. So those films that are, getting to that 15 million mark, who are then competing with, bigger shoots coming here, whether that's TV or film, the studio things. I think that's where it gets tricky, because then you're competing for the same HODs, and I can see a bit of a fight, charm offensive coming, or at least that's the panic side of me. But we'll get through it. But yeah, it is. I think it is an issue that we need to continue to address and continue to kind of go, well, what is there? Is there more that we can do? It's not just the training. It's like, how do we make lower budget independent films attractive to those HODs and other people who have established themselves?
Yeah.
You know, like it's not, yeah, like that I think is still a conundrum.
I think it is making an attractive industry to work in, and hopefully this will boost more entrants coming into the sector. There was one thing I did want to touch on, and this is something we touched on last year that wasn't in the original consultation. I do think it's important that we unpack it. It was that when the government responded to the original consultation, there was a mention of third-party connections, and I think it's important that we do. And I'm looking directly at you, Isla, as you can see, and I'm going to ask you to explain where we are now with it.
So there has just been a couple of updates just in terms of the process that HMRC requires. So if you are claiming under the current tax relief system or one of the new ones, you have to now fill in an additional information form. It's all very minor and it's stuff you would have to hand anyway. But any of the new reliefs, so that's any of the new AVEC, so that would include your independent film at 53%, you have to disclose all your connected party transactions. So that means if you're a producer and you've set up a UK company and you're making your film through that company, and then that film from that UK entity is paying your producing company a fee that you also own, that would be a connected party transaction. So that's probably quite a straightforward one we can get our head around. But it does mean that you, as the person sort of in charge of the company and who will be sort of ultimately responsible for making the tax credit claim, you just need to be aware of these from the outset, just so you can track them and make your life as easy as possible when you get to the end and you have to put them all into some sort of spreadsheet and submit it to HMRC. So in terms of the process, nothing should change. HMRC have made it quite clear that they still expect all connected party transactions to be on an arm's length basis. So what that means is what you would charge to a third party is the same amount as you would charge to your film production company. So all business is normal in that respect, but you do just have to make sure you are tracking it so you can make a complete and full disclosure when you make your submission.
And there is the form that you have to fill in. You have to fill in either on the day or before you put your claim in, don't you? HMRC keeps stressing to tell everyone you can't, if you don't fill in the form before you put the claim in, then it ends up being a late claim. So please make sure you fill it in either on the day or when you're making the claim. Just before we wrap up, I think there's one question. We could potentially have an election coming. What would happen in terms of, we're now going through with legislation. I'm looking at you, Harriet, but I'm happy to answer it for you if you wish.
No, I mean, I think we've obviously, this was rushed through. I mean, it was easy for them to rush it through because it's an adjustment to the AVEC, which had already been kind of redesigned. So that's the reason it's come in so quickly. There is, I mean, certainly, you know, as an arm's length body, you know, we work very closely, obviously, with DCMS, etc. But also we do, you know, make sure that Labour government do understand the importance of this to the sector. And I think, you know, they have heard loud and clear just how warmly welcomed this has been. Absolutely universally, you know, going to make an absolute step change in terms of that kind of both the cultural and economic impact of independent film. I think I'd be very, very surprised if they were to overturn it. But also, I think, you know, we're hoping what essentially should happen. You know,
we can't say, but hopefully soon, later in the summer. That's what we're saying. Yeah. But as I understand, and this is technical legislation, it's a negative. We have to do what is called a statutory instrument. We don't, but the government does, and we work with them. A negative statutory instrument, so it wouldn't impact if election was called early. And as Harriet has said, every government is supportive. Every party in the government are very supportive of our tax reliefs. The film tax relief that was introduced in 2007 was under a Labour government. They were also supportive of introducing additional tax reliefs before we moved to a coalition government, and that government then took forward for the high-end TV, animation and games. So I think, you know, and we do evaluate every 2 or 3 years with our Screen Business Report how important all the tax reliefs are, the screen sector tax reliefs. I keep saying tax reliefs, we're expenditure credits. Expenditure credits are to the economy, the cultural value in the UK. So I don't think there will be a concern there. I'm going to open up to questions in a moment. I just wanted to, I promise. But I wanted to ask if anyone wanted to put any final comments before I open up to everyone. There's no pressure. Yeah.
Well, just to say, I think it's a game changer for us in the UK, and again, congratulations to Harriet and the team that put this all together. But also from a financing perspective, I guess there's a little bit extra or double the tax credit than it was with the independent film tax credit. That hopefully you can get a little bit more funding more cost effectively if you come to a bank from that perspective. So just bear that in mind that if you want to go get that funded, then that come to the hopefully go to the most cost efficient place to fund it.
Yeah. Anyone else got any final comments?
It was not just the BFI who did this. It was very definitely a pan-industry piece of work. And I do think as a sector, we've got better and better and better at coming together and aligning very, very closely on the really key issues that are impacting the sector. And it's something we've got into a routine of doing through when we were leaving the EU, through the work that we did through the Screen Sector Task Force during COVID, through the work we've done on the skills piece and challenges there, through the work that we did around AVEC. And this is just another example of actually how if you've got really strong evidence-backed policy recommendations with the weight of industry coming in, unified voice behind it, everything from the big studios through to those on the ground, actually you can make a really significant difference. And it is very much about being a sort of industry kind of working really, really effectively together.
Isla, Bennett, do you want to add anything else? You
I
don't
think
have
you
to.
said it all. It's a wonderful piece.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's something, as Anna said earlier, just the influx and the increased conversation around what can now be done in terms of UK film in the UK is just this is what this has driven. So I think it's a really exciting time to enter that.
Yeah. So I know you've got a question. Oh, we've got lots of questions. Okay. Do you want to go first? We can. There's a mic behind you.
Okay, so if we make an independent film on a low budget, which sadly I've done, and I can never one in the future, you think it has to be intended for theatrical release to get, but what if we don't get theatrical release, which we probably won't?
You have to demonstrate the intention of that you are intending it for it to be a cinematic release. We do the check at the BFI during.
How would you demonstrate that? Would you say I really, really want to do this theatrically, but
But you are reaching out to distributors and you have some sort of some evidence to show that. Although we will do the check and we will ask you when you do your cultural test application, it's technically HMRC's definition. And there is a definition on HMRC's website of what they are looking for. But it is always about the intention, so we can see that you did actually intend to release it theatrically from the outset. And I do understand that there are streamers now picking up independent film, but you do have to make that intention from the outset that you tried to get a theatrical release.
Because the previous two films got 20%, we actually got the money, but we didn't get a theatrical release. But we've got a sales agent somewhere in the festival selling it for us, but it's just gone to streaming.
And demonstrating that we are trying to sell it through festivals, and it's not something that you've created from the start to go straight to DVD, if that still exists, or onto a streamer.
I think intention is the defining thing.
Right. 1, 2, 3.
2 questions. 3 or 4, actually.
Okay.
The mandatory theatrical release, where does that leave documentary films? That's number 1.
Okay.
2 is to Coutts. Do you fund or would you fund black content, as in films made by black people or films with black content? 3, does the BFI has the BFI discussed with the government about the deficit in the sector caused by Brexit, and is the tax relief and the whatnot part and parcel of the efforts to plug that? Thirdly, is the tax relief compatible with the Global Screen Fund?
Yes. I'll answer that one very quickly, yes.
Okay. And don't remember the fourth.
Okay. I think that was quite because there's other hands up. I'm gonna. So, your first question, and then I'll go to Judith. In terms of the theatrical release, it's not mandatory, as we were just saying. It has to be intended for theatrical release, and that includes documentary as well. Judith.
So from funding, yes, we absolutely would. We would. We're sort of agnostic in that respect, so we would absolutely fund whether it's black producer, director, or black content film, as it were.
Yeah.
We would absolutely do that. For us, it's the numbers that have got to work. So we would basically, and our criteria, which is lending against pre-sales and tax credits.
Okay.
And then just, on the documentary piece, something actually which changed during the course of from the original proposal through to when it was implemented. The original proposal actually was for films in the bracket of 1 to 15 million, and actually when it was announced, there's no floor. So for documentary, I know that was a really critical piece, was actually ensuring that actually you had 0 to 15 million would be eligible for the new relief. So I'm really hoping that for documentary filmmakers that is a big boost, because we were really worried about that. In terms of the BFI, I'm suddenly having a blank as to what you asked me a question, and I've suddenly having a blank.
Brexit.
Oh, the Brexit piece. Yes. Okay. So obviously, as we fought very hard in terms of trying to remain part of Creative Europe as we came through, and that wasn't going to be the case. And we are where we are on the fact that we are currently not members of the Creative Europe Media Programme. We are, though. Obviously, we've got the Global Screen Fund, which has been incredibly successful, and I think to a lot of people I'm sure in this room has been a real lifeline in terms of thinking differently about minority co-production, business development, etc. So that is something which is critical, that we keep working very closely with government in terms of making the case for that continued funding. I don't know in terms of the future, in terms of what happens with Creative Europe. That'll be something which is an ongoing conversation. We obviously remain very close to our European colleagues. They are hugely important parts of the world we work in, and I think we'll just have to wait and see whether there are opportunities further down the line in terms of kind of rejoining programs like Media, etc.
Then just sorry, Bennett.
I was just going to quickly add, I would say the question about if it's compatible with Global Screen Fund, I think the independent tax credit is compatible with everything. I don't know there is a scenario, as long as it qualifies, of course, if it's a UK film and hits the criteria. So that's the first piece on your finance plan straight away.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. If you are applying for the Global Screen Fund, they will ask you that it qualifies as British, so going through the tax credit. And I think everyone should be doing the expenditure credit rather than tax relief. Thank you. Gentleman there, and then the lady there, and then that gentleman.
Right, so you've sort of answered it, but you haven't answered it quite. So between that pile and that those listeners, there's a sizable increase. So there has to be a definition of what is deemed to be independent somewhere, presumably inland revenue.
For the purposes of this, it's under 15 million. It's meeting.
But presumably someone somewhere will say, it is independent or it isn't independent, and maybe that's HMRC. No. I mean, likewise.
No, you just have to meet the criteria for
really?
under 50 million.
So if
That's just the name.
Yeah.
So we slightly joke that they've called it the independent film tax credit. It's not independent in that respect. It's that criteria, and it's not a tax credit. It's an expenditure credit. So it's got to be a film.
So if my money comes from Netflix, say, and it's deemed it's going to have a theatrical release because they're putting a theatrical release window, and Netflix is a big company, that's still independent.
It can, inward investment, absolutely fine.
So
it's not. You don't look at who's paying for it. It's the criteria. So it's the budget, and then the other criteria you need to meet.
So there has to be a British writer or a British script writer, and that's a citizen or resident.
Even though we have to disclose connected party transactions, is that tied into that?
No.
So a connected party applies to AVEC for film and TV, even at the lower rate, standard.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, is there a minimum base? So you're going up to 15 million. At one point, it was between 1 and 15 million. Is that down to zero? Now you can do a £40,000 movie.
As long as it's intended.
If you can do it.
Yeah, that's exactly what Harriet was saying. There had been an original plan for a £1 million threshold, but that was taken away. So it's anything from £10. I doubt we'll get it. But just for clarity's sake, anything from £10 or 50p up to 15 million.
Packet of sandwiches, marvellous. Yeah. And something unrelated, the skills clusters, is that incentivised in some way, or is there a threshold? You have to do some of this to make it work. Is that tied in?
No,
Well-
it's got no relation to the tax relief. The skills clusters is a national lottery funding intervention.
But we do have all of our expenditure credits or tax reliefs, because you can still claim tax reliefs if you want. There is a skills investment fund that you can opt into paying that has been around since the old sale and leaseback days. And on our cultural test form, we can't share your contact details, but if you agree to share them, we will then share them with Screen Skills so they can follow up with you. So that can feed into further Screen Skills. That, yeah, not dollars. I think the lady that was there is gone. The gentleman there.
Hi, thank you. I run a British production company. I'm very grateful for the tax credits to date, especially to Chantel Burrell and her team.
Oh,
Just to clarify one point, so on the new independent film tax credit, it's 80% of UK core, still the 80%.
Yeah, the 80% threshold is still in there.
Okay,
For all of the AVEC and the VJEC. I presume no one's doing video games here, but similarly, the VGT video games tax relief is moving over to video games expenditure credit. Do we have another question? We've got one down the front. We've got two down the front. This gentleman and then this gentleman.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if there's any concerns that if there's no definition of independent producer, that it won't actually have the intended consequence of supporting British independent productions, but actually could end up supporting Fox, Searchlight, Netflix and others.
I mean, I'm happy to take that one. So I think obviously there's quite a lot of debate around this, and it was obviously discussed in terms of the kind of policy intent of it. During the course of the kind of this period between January and March is actually, we moved from the original proposal that had been drawn up by PACT, and there are these guardrails on it now, which are very much in terms of actually kind of the nurturing British talent piece of it. So UK writer, UK director, and then international co-production as the guardrails that have been put on it, so that it will deliver on that policy intent. And I think, in terms of there being, the streamers are very much part of our landscape now. They're very much part of, our financing world, and people do actually want the choice as to how they, make their films. And I think it wasn't for us to decide, that actually people limit people's choice in that piece as well. So the piece that keeps it focused is those guardrails that were put on during that 3 months.
Thanks.
Of the 80% qualifying expenditure, is that all UK expenditure, above the line, below the line, everything, or does anything not qualify?
There's certain costs that wouldn't qualify, but in terms of categories, all yes, so above the line, below the line, but it has to be production costs, so certain things would not be qualifying spend, such as finance costs, marketing costs, distribution costs, sort of entertaining, there's a few others, but actually something that is really positive about the way the UK tax credit as it currently is and the expenditure credits is we have the used or consumed principle, so there's probably potentially more costs that would be UK qualifying spend than you might think there would be just on the face of it. So an example being if you had a US cast member who was coming over to the UK and doing their shoot days entirely in the UK, that US cast fee, probably paid in US dollars, would be UK spend for the purposes of our UK tax relief and expenditure credit. But yeah, there is a significant number of qualifying costs. It's all the costs that go into the actual production making of your film.
And I don't know if I've retained all the details, but I think there were also some line items in the budget that have actually increased, where there used to be 50%, only 50% of this spend is qualifies, but now there's like an increase in some things. So I think overall there's like some benefits. Am I making that up? You're looking at me like I'm making it up. I'm making it up. I'm not. I'll look
Do you
again.
mean it?
Nice try.
Do you mean that you have a line item that is in two different countries and a fair?
No, I meant I think there are some things, and sorry for not providing the detail. There are some things that used to only 50% of this is qualifying, as in like an odd line. I'm not expressing it.
There's
very
nothing
well, am I?
legislative that sort of that, but there will be sort of nuances. So there'll be some costs that you might incur that it's one person or one vendor, and some of it is non-qualifying, some of it is, but it's those sorts of things that it is good to speak to someone, because actually some of it might be qualifying when on the face of it you think it might not be.
Question here, Ladybird.
Yes, reiterating the thanks for the panel session and obviously getting this through. As you were saying, there's a huge interest from other co-production parties in working with the UK. And so if you go down that co-production route, how does that qualifying expenditure work? I'll give you a sort of live example, what if the filmmaker who is the writer-director is French or German, but the star and the lead actor or actress is British? And what if you're shooting 80% in France, but the rest in the UK what are the rules for co-production?
So the qualifying criteria under 50 million, it's if you're going down the cultural test route, that needs to be a UK or a writer or director, or it qualifies as an official co-production. So because there's a co-production, you're likely to have a French director.
Yes, exactly.
So that's not part of it. I would say with co-production, we still have that issue with the 80% cap on the UK spend. So the expenditure will be slightly less, and I know Isla loves doing co-production calculations.
I won't go into the details of how a co-production calculation works because we've got far more fun things to be doing with our day. But Anna's right. So with the way a co-production works, so this would be looking at a film qualifying under the UK cultural test, and you look at the total budget. When you have a co-production, you need to look at your UK budget and your non-UK production budget separately, and you take your UK one and you still have to apply the 80% cap to that. So the 4.77 figure, you wouldn't get to that under a co-production. It's less, the maximum amount you could get.
But the reason behind that is your co-producing partner or partners, if you're doing a multilateral, will be hopefully accessing their own incentives in those territories. So actually each country's benefiting. So yeah, if it was 20, if you were filming in France and you were doing the post in the UK, then you'd still be able to claim as long as you're meeting the 10% minimum threshold that we've had for a number of years. I think we may have to go for one final question. Oh, Judith's got a question. Yeah, I'll take one final question from Flora and after Judith.
So if I was a producer, which I'm not, but if my budget is 14.75 and damn, I've just gone over budget to about 16 million, what happens to that extra million? Does it qualify in any way? Can I claim anything on that?
We will be finalising in terms of that kind of thing, because obviously a lot of film budgets go over as well. So there will be sort of legislation and guidance about what happens in those scenarios, but we just can't say yet because we're still in the legislative phase. But that is one of the several questions that we've had, and we understand that, so government is aware of that. Thank you. There's one final question. I'm afraid we will have to wrap up. I'm sorry.
Thanks. Thanks for your time today. Just a quick one around shorts. Would it apply to short films as well?
Yes, as long as they're intended for theatrical and you have the UK writer or director. Okay. I don't think I've ever seen a shorts application for a co-pro, because that would be quite difficult. But yeah, thank you. I just want to thank my panellists, Harriet, Bennett, Judith and Isla. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.